All right, everyone, get ready because today we are diving deep into the future, into the heart of 21st century India.
Sounds fascinating.
It is. We're looking at two articles, India in the 21st century and India's path to global influence. And, well, they both paint a pretty fascinating picture. They really make you think about India's place in the world, where they are now and where they're headed.
And it's a pivotal moment for them, no doubt.
It really is. I mean, get this. India just surpassed China as the world's most populous nation.
Yeah, I saw that.
What do you think? What does that mean for everything?
Honestly, it's a huge deal.
Hmm.
It's not just about sheer numbers, right? Think of the potential workforce. It's a consumer market that's just massive,
Hmm.
almost bigger than any other. But, that comes with its own challenges, of course.
I-
It's one thing to have all those people, but India's real test is going to be, can they equip them? Can they provide the education and the opportunities to turn that population into a true powerhouse?
Yeah.
That's where things get really interesting.
That's a really good point. And speaking of interesting, both articles point out this kind of paradox. They say that India has incredible natural resources like massive mineral reserves, but at the same time, they're still pretty dependent on energy imports.
Yeah, it's like having a pantry full of food, but needing someone else to turn on the oven.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Definitely makes them vulnerable. They rely a lot on countries like the U.S. and Russia for energy. That creates a really delicate balancing act. It affects their foreign policy, their economic stability.
Hmm.
It's a big deal.
Speaking of balancing acts, both articles talked about all these different organizations that India is a part of. You've got BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then there's Quad with the US, Japan, Australia, and India. That's a lot to keep track of.
I know, right? But that's the thing. That's India's strategy. See, they're not just picking sides. They're engaging with multiple alliances, and
Yeah.
each one has these different economic and political implications. They call it multi-alignment, and it's all about leveraging relationships, counterbalancing the influence of other nations, because India, they're not content with just being a follower. They want to be a global leader.
It's like they're playing chess on a global scale.
This-
So we've talked about how India's playing this complex game on the world stage, right? Building all these alliances. But it gets even more interesting when you look at their neighbors. The article spent a lot of time talking about India's relationships in their own backyard, especially with China.
Yeah, and for good reason.
Yeah,
That relationship with China, it's got to be one of the most important in the world right now, don't you think?
totally. I mean, they're in BRICS together, right? Working to kind of shake things up a bit on the global stage. But then there's this rivalry. Like, they're both trying to be the dominant force in Asia.
Yeah, it's like they're frenemies. It's high stakes, too. Both countries with nuclear weapons, their economies are growing super fast. And then there's that whole history of territorial disputes.
It's a lot.
It really is.
And the articles mention this phrase, strategic encirclement. It sounds kind of intimidating, honestly. What is that all about?
Well, it's something China's been doing, and it's making India pretty nervous. Basically, China's been investing tons of money in infrastructure in the countries around India, like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, even Nepal. They're building ports and roads and railways.
So it's like they're trying to box India in.
Basically, yeah. And it's not just about economics, that infrastructure. It has military implications, too. Like,
Yeah.
look at that port China's developing at Gwadar in Pakistan. That gives them a strategic foothold right there in the Indian Ocean, and India sees that as a direct threat.
Wow. Talk about playing for keeps.
Yeah.
And speaking of tense relationships, the articles didn't hold back on how volatile things are with Pakistan. That whole Kashmir conflict just seems like it could explode at any minute.
Yeah, it's been going on for decades, right? Fueled by historical stuff, religious tensions, and those territorial disputes we talked about. India and Pakistan both say Kashmir belongs to them, and they've already fought wars over it.
And on top of all that, they both have nuclear weapons now. The articles called it a global powder keg, and I can see why.
It's scary, honestly. If things escalated between India and Pakistan, well, it could spiral out of control fast. And the consequences wouldn't just be regional, it could affect the whole world.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it? These regional tensions have global implications. And it makes me think about India's other relationships in the region, like with Nepal and Sri Lanka.
Oh, absolutely. These are countries where India wants to have a more peaceful influence, right? Through economic partnerships, cultural exchanges, what they call soft power. But even those relationships are complicated.
It's like they can't escape the baggage.
It's more than baggage, really. These smaller nations, they know how big and powerful India is, and they're walking a tightrope, trying to maintain good relationships with their giant neighbor
Well,
while still looking out for their own interests.
so even with countries they're supposedly on good terms with, there's this constant tension, this balancing act they have to maintain.
Exactly. And that's really key to understanding India's global ambitions. You got to understand these complex relationships they're navigating right in their own backyard. It's fascinating, isn't it?
Absolutely fascinating. It's wild, right? Thinking about all that geopolitical maneuvering going on, and then on the inside, India is dealing with its own set of huge challenges. The articles paint this really, I don't know, kind of a contradictory picture of what's going on within India itself.
It really is a tale of two Indias in a lot of ways. On one hand, you've got this economic powerhouse. I mean, they're a global leader when it comes to IT,
Right.
pharmaceuticals.
Right. The pharmacy of the developing world.
Exactly. And manufacturing, they're a major player. And then there's that whole Bollywood meets Silicon Valley thing.
Yeah. Bangalore is this huge tech hub. So much energy there. You can just feel that potential.
And it's real potential.
Yeah.
But and I think this is what makes it so complex. You have this other side. The poverty, the inequality, it's still a major issue. And honestly, their infrastructure is struggling to keep up with all that growth. So yeah, some people are riding this wave of progress, but a lot are getting left behind.
That's what's so interesting to me, that contrast. It's like they're trying to build a high-speed rail network while some people still don't have access to clean water. And the article suggests that this isn't just like a humanitarian issue, right? It's a threat to their stability in general.
Absolutely. It's a recipe for unrest. If you have a huge chunk of the population
Yeah.
that isn't benefiting from all this economic growth, well, it leads to instability. And that's
Mm.
where understanding their democracy, how it works, gets really important.
Right. They were talking about how India has this really interesting political system, strong regional parties, a super diverse group of voters. It just seems like governing a country that massive and that diverse would be incredibly difficult.
It's a huge undertaking. And it's even more complex now because of what's going on politically. The articles mention the rise of Hindu nationalism, and that adds a whole other layer, wouldn't you say?
Because it makes you question their identity as a secular democracy, right? Like, can they have both?
Exactly. Can a nation as diverse as India, with all its different languages, religions, cultures, can it really embrace this kind of religious nationalism and not alienate huge portions of its population? That's a big question they're facing, and honestly, the answer is going to have a ripple effect. We'll feel it everywhere.
So, if I'm understanding this right, India's path to becoming this global superpower, it doesn't just depend on them playing the game on the world stage, right? They have to tackle these internal challenges too.
Absolutely. It's like this massive balancing act. Can they make the most of their economic potential? Can they figure out these social divisions? And can they hold on to those democratic values while they're trying to assert themselves globally? I don't know. It makes you think, doesn't it?
It really does. And that's what I love about these deep dives, right? You come away with more questions than answers, but you also come away with a better understanding of what's going on in the world, and I think that's so important. If you want to keep exploring this, by the way, we've got some great resources for you. Check out the show notes. We've got articles, books, even a documentary or two that'll take you even deeper. Thanks for coming on this journey with us, everyone. Keep those questions coming, and we'll be back soon with another deep dive.